Yeah, it's incredible that the room here is filled like that. So, dear all, esteemed guests, it's a great honor to welcome you to the conference Postkolonialismus, Postcolonial Perspectives on Poland, Ukraine, and Eastern Europe here at the Pilecki Institute, Berlin. I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you, and I'm looking forward to 3 exciting conference days. I'm extremely happy that the acting director of the Pilecki Institute in Warsaw, Dr. Wojciech Kozłowski, is with us today. We're grateful that he supported our idea for the conference right from the beginning, found the time to join us in Berlin for this event, and that he'll open our conference officially with his welcoming words in a few minutes. I also would like to thank the head of the Berlin branch of the Pilecki Institute, Hania Radziejowska, and the deputy head, Mateusz Fałkowski, for providing us with the opportunity to realize this conference, which takes as a starting point their representative Ipsos survey on prevailing stereotypes and knowledge gaps in German society regarding the history and present of Poland, Ukraine, and Eastern Europe. A special thanks goes to my colleague, Dr. Elisabeth Katzi, without whose conceptual and organizational support the organization of this conference would not have been possible. A huge thank you to you, the other members of the production team of our institute, the colleagues from communication, our technicians, Patrick, Claudia, Adam, Julia, Witold, Jeva, Kamila, Alexander, Magda, Jakub, Emilia, Max, Jakob, Marek, Alexandra, and to those who I probably forgot to mention, please forgive me, for your ongoing and much needed support. For the next 3 days, we are gathering to address a question that is not only relevant for academic research, but which is highly important for social cohesion in Europe and, thus, for our idea as well as the future of Europe. The question that will be at the core of the conference is, how can post-colonial theoretical approaches contribute to developing new perspectives and a better understanding of the history of Poland, Ukraine, and Eastern Europe at large, and the entanglements of this region with Germany and Russia. I myself, as someone who was born in Poland, grew up in Germany, completed my education here, gained practical experience in working in the field of memorial sites and remembrance culture in Germany, learned how crucial this question is through my personal experiences with the marginalization of the history of what is typically called Eastern Europe, in school, university, and educational work at memorial sites and museums. I'd like to tell you about a situation I experienced at an educational project with mostly German university students shortly before I started my work at Pilecki Institute Berlin. This project took place in a well-known German memorial site, a former Nazi concentration camp. I was there as a translator for a Polish Auschwitz survivor from Warsaw. She was invited to tell her story to the participants, and she told about the Warsaw Uprising, the massacre of Wola, her deportation to Auschwitz and other concentration camps in Germany, as well as her return to Warsaw after the end of the war. Her story provoked a telling reaction of one of the staff members of the memorial site. This person mentioned that the survivor's story sounded like Polish nationalist propaganda or history politics. In German, we have the term Geschichtspolitik to them. To me, this showed not only the knowledge gaps regarding the history of Poland or even the history of the German occupation of Poland during the Second World War, but also the arrogance and missing empathy towards the story of a Polish survivor of Nazi persecution, which result from the limitations of German remembrance culture and the stereotypical view of Polish society and Polish memory narratives, which in turn emerged from colonial traditions of thought. The aim of this conference is to explore how post-colonial and decolonial perspectives can help to close these gaps, challenge existing preconceptions, and foster a more nuanced engagement with history and memory, and finally, a more inclusive historiography. We are very pleased that our call for contributions was so well received and that we received so many applications, which unfortunately meant that we couldn't accept all excellent proposals, which we of course very much regret. However, we are grateful that the contributions cover such an extraordinary wide range of disciplines and variety of topics. We are very happy as well about the incredible interest and the large number of registrations for our conference. We are very much looking forward to exciting discussions, interdisciplinary and diverse perspectives, inspiring new theoretical and practical approaches in the next 3 days. Let us use this opportunity to critically examine colonial traditions of thought and find new paths towards a shared and more inclusive understanding of our past and present. I wish you and us all a stimulating and insightful conference. And before handing over to the next speaker, let me briefly address an organizational issue. One of the workshops we initially offered and planned to carry out, the one on decolonial approaches on educational work, intercultural sensitivity, and the Pyramid of Alliance, fell prey to a last-minute cancellation. Fortunately, my esteemed colleague from the Education Department, Alexander Klimuk, spontaneously offered to jump in and run a workshop tomorrow for around 30 participants, which is entitled Narrating 20th Century Polish History, a workshop in the permanent exhibition of the Pilecki Institute, Berlin. You can register for the workshop at the reception until tomorrow's lunch break. What's more, due to the large number of registrations and limited spots available, unfortunately, we had to limit the number of participants for the workshops. We therefore kindly ask everyone registered for the workshops thus far to confirm their attendance again. Otherwise, the spot will become available for all waiting list registrants. In any case, you can find all registration lists and all relevant information at the reception, and the whole process is based on first come, first serve. Remember, the deadline is tomorrow lunch break. So if that wasn't clear, just ask me later if you have more questions regarding the workshops. So we apologize for the inconvenience and kindly ask for your understanding, and thank you very much.
I can only confirm this what my colleague Lukas told. I'm very pleased to welcome you to our conference in Berlin, and in the following days we will have opportunity to exchange about the ideas with the international scholars from different countries about this topic. We have more than 25 lectures. You can, if you have the program, you can see it's more than 25 on the next 3 days, and also 3 parallel workshops we offer and 3 discussions. Yeah, sure. I'm sorry. I forgot now the word. So the 3 discussion we have also, and all program we have in our small booklet also with little bit more information with small abstracts, also short biography from the speakers. And now I can wish you very fruitful days with interesting lecture, and how Lukas told, we have so small changes. You can ask us, and also some lectures, it will be via Zoom. Is, for example, the first keynote speaker, our keynote speaker, Franziska Davies, couldn't come today and participate here in person, and this is the first lecture what we have via Zoom, and also we offer possibility to watch our conference via Zoom. If you need link or you would like to share with your friends or colleagues, tell us. We make this possible. So during the conference, we offer also coffee breaks. It will be everything in the entrance. We will have the coffee breaks, and also today in the evening, 7 p.m., small reception. If you have time, you can enjoy us in the evening. So now I take floor. So our active director from Warsaw, Dr. Wojciech Kozłowski, and he opened the conference officially.
Hello and welcome. Thank you very much for these kind words about me finding time to travel over here to Berlin and welcome you in person. I always appreciate coming to Berlin. It's just, there need to be a good reason for me not to come. This is a very good one to be here, so I'm glad. And I also want to pass my greetings from other Pilecki Institute offices throughout Poland and abroad to all of you. Thank you, the Berlin team, for your work and for bringing us together for this conference. A special credit goes to Lukas Wieczorek, the conference's leading creator. Yeah, let's give him applause. In 2019, we arrived in Berlin to begin a dialogue with our German and international partners. We aimed at creating a venue where freedom and mutual respect meet with genuine curiosity about each other, about the past and how it affects the present. Now, I am proud to admire a team constantly engaged in a conversation that draws Central and Eastern Europe closer to the hearts and minds of our audience. I appreciate the team's resourcefulness and creativity, which appeared essential to turning our Berlin office into a vibrant and energetic organization fueled by European values of open dialogue, the exchange of ideas, which you just promised, and respectful disagreement. Building on our 5-year-long experience in Germany and on the inviting spirit of the Berlin office, today we're beginning something new. We're embarking on yet another way to seek a better grasp of what Central and Eastern Europe is about. By exploring multiple intellectual and academic avenues, especially the ones strongly resonating in German discourses, the Pilecki Institute will contribute to enhancing the understanding and significance of our region. And just to make a side note, a week ago we had another international conference in Warsaw about the future of the future of the study of the Central and East European studies in the face of the Russian aggression on Ukraine. And today, opening this conference in Berlin about post-colonialismus and this perspective on how to view Central and Eastern Europe, I believe shows the Pilecki Institute's adamant dedication and commitment to constantly interpret, reinterpret, and work with the 20th century history, with our experience of 2 totalitarian regimes in Central and Eastern Europe, because we believe that only through that ongoing conversation and exchange, we're actually having a chance to move forward and to educate each other. We always believe in the Pilecki Institute that even if we learned a lot, there is still vast spaces that we still need to absorb. So I am proud and happy to be here, and officially open this conference, thanking you for your presence and thanking the team to organizing this venue so that you have a place to come in, sit down, and enjoy the conversations which I fully and wholeheartedly wish you to have fun with this hours and days ahead of us. Thank you.
So now we start with the first lecture. So by Hanna Radziejowska and Mateusz Wałkowski, the German Society Historical Self-Image, which regrets to the 20th century and its perception of Poland. Hanna Radziejowska, it's director of our branch here in Berlin. It's also curator of several exhibitions. For example, Witold Pilecki, I can recommend this our permanent exhibition here in our house for tomorrow probably, and also curator of Wola Massacre, and many different exhibitions. Mateusz Wałkowski is the deputy director of the Pilecki Institute in Berlin. He studied sociology in Warsaw, Berlin, and Erfurt, and published numerous of works, papers, to history, sociology, and so similar topics. And now I take your floor, start with the lecture.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So thank you very much. So we start this, many people say or argue that the lecture or a paper should be started with a joke. We don't have a joke, but we have a picture. This picture is for a reason. We want to share this picture because this is the Polish-German border on the Oder River, as seen from the morning train from Berlin to Warsaw. I travel a lot on this route, so this is something. This picture was made about 1 week ago, so 7 a.m. On the Oder, and this is because we are going to talk about some of the mental boundaries, not only the borders, the material border between the states, but also about the mental boundaries in the minds of Germans looking at Poland and at the Poles. I don't know what the average depth of, respectively, the Oder and the Rhine is, but in social reality, in social world, in social studies, it's the metaphorical Oder, the river that borders Poland, that is deeper than the Rhine, the river that borders France, close to Freiburg in Breisgau. The river can be a nice metaphor. So you can swim across, you can build bridges. It's a natural demarcation. It has some historical significance. It can be, for example, a limes of any or another empire. And this is something which brings me to show our puzzle, our research questions and our puzzle. So for us, the main question is, what is the place of Polish history in the social consciousness of Germans? What are specifically Germans' attitudes toward Poland and Polish history? Not only knowledge, but also knowledge. Knowledge and attitudes are two different things. And how this perception is related to their own, German historical self-awareness in the context, for example, of the Second World War. And this is one very fundamental and important thing when we are talking about the relation to other people or the perception of other nations. So this is not only about these other nations, this is on other people, but also about us. So if we ask Germans what they think or what they know about Poles, we also ask about what they think about themselves. And what is this social consciousness? So we can shortly, this is following the footsteps of Emil Durkheim. So we can say that social consciousness is the whole complex of attitudes and institutions. So the rules of the game. So win in the sense that it is maybe making this long story short, so that this is the summing up of education, various institutionalized forms of official memory and commemoration, social memory, and respectively individual memories. And altogether, we have such a complex of attitudes and social facts we are talking about. So the fast forward, so we can see. So because of the inspiration of this research of us, there were some lectures, some books also of German authors. So the very fact that Germany that there's the lively discussion, public debate about the public memory, about commemoration, and what German call Erinnerungskultur, the culture of remembrance. And we live in Berlin for 5 years already, and we observe this discussion. And we read also some books. And in one of the books, so Samuel Salzborn argues how this historical knowledge in the German debate is being universalized and thus denied. So I mean that the very fact of making the claim about universalization of history has some consequences for what we do to the facts, historical facts. And memory is being deconstructed, dehistorized, and emotionalized. And in a way, our research confirms or supports this assertion. Another point I would mention here is the point of Tatiana Tönsmeier in her last book, about occupation, so that he argues and mentions that according to the sociology of knowledge, ignorance is not simply an absence of knowledge, but the product of cultural and political conflicts. And this is something which is quite important for us because the very fact that the society so I have to be careful with micro because my colleague alarms me. The very fact that I don't know. But the fact that society, that members of society, or the members of certain community or a group, don't know something about the past, has a meaning. This research is based on this paper is based on research conducted in the field by Ipsos, Germany. So in July of this year, on behalf of our institute. And now I want to go into the short introduction. So the short introduction signifying the long persistence of certain stereotypes. And so one person and one research, one approach which we have or which we can to mention is the famous book by Larry Wolff, and about the division of Europe into an Eastern, which was the backward and uncivilized part, and the Western, modern and civilized part. So this argument is about the thinkers and travelers of enlightenment of the late 18th century, who created a normative and value-laden inner European dichotomy. Then we can take another book, another research by German historian Bernhard Strack, and on the travels of Germans to France and Poland. And this is very, very interesting case, or very interesting argument, because the argument of Strack is more or less that in this subtle side in this special period. So we can observe the emergence of negative general statements about the backwardness or national character of Poles. But this very fact of making these opinions is connected or is associated by Strack not with the very fact of observation of certain examples of backwardness or poor countryside, for example, the mud in the streets, in the villages, because the travelers found the same landscapes also in France, but more with the awakening of German nationalism within the German society. And it goes to the next order. So the political scientist Rogers Brubaker. Brubaker wrote a book about nationalism, and he observed or he analyzed that the German understanding of nationality is based on distinction, quite different from the French understanding based on assimilation. And his observation was that exactly the ethnic and cultural boundary between German and Slavs was central to the sense of German identity. And this border has no equivalent in the case of Germany, respectively, and France. And the last point, so the observation or the phrase of Hubert Orłowski, so the specialist of German studies from Poland, so who observed that Poland for Germans historically was the distorting mirror of modernization and treasury of modernization deficits. The first question, or the first point I want to mention from our research. So this is several questions. We asked several questions concerning or related to Poland and respectively France. And there was the questions about the historical period of pre-war period before the war, so the Polish Second Republic and Republic of France at that particular time. And we asked the questions about the opinions of respondents relating to the level of democracy, to the level of women participation, and to the level of multiculturality. And this is something which we made as a proxy for how people perceive a certain standard of visionary or imaginary standard of this particular community or this particular country as regards these values which are important now, because our perception, our imagination about the past is also the effect or consequence of the civic education and discussion of the present. And we see that Poland was which was one of the first countries in the world to grant full political rights to women in 1918, even before Germany, is perceived as a country where women didn't have these rights, unlike France, where, after all, political rights were granted to women in 1946. So the reality is other than the perception or the imagination on that. And the positively connoted today multiculturalism is attributed to pre-war France, not to the then, at that time, completely multi-ethnic Poland, so of the multi-ethnic pre-war Poland. The stereotypes and perceptions, rather positive about France and rather negative about Poland, are based on a lack of knowledge about both countries, but as a belief, they grow out of the perceptions of East and West, where Poland is more likely to function as part of the backward ethno-nationalist East, while France exemplifies in this picture the multicultural progressive West. Another example from our research. So this is the open question, so with spontaneous answers about the associations with Poland. So what do you think when you think of Poland? And we see here so that But we have, of course, so some spontaneous answers regarding the country of vacation destination, yes. So the Urlaubsland. So, but we also have this neutral description of the country neighborhood. But we can distinguish very clearly. Very clearly, we can distinguish the group of association with which are definitely negative, and with long persistence of stereotypes. This is associations with criminality, also with Poland as a poor country, with Poland as a conservative and country. So this is the quite a big number of these answers are the answers negatively laden. And this is maybe I just mentioned, so the two short small things from the answers from this question. So this is, for example, we observe, because we ask several analogical questions regarding France. And we observe that so this picture of France is better than of Poland, but what I wanted to mention is, for example, that we have some answers relating, for example, to resistance as something associated with France. So the resistance movement from the Second World War is something mentioned by German respondents. In the case of Poland, is rather so. Okay, so there's the war, but the fact that there was one of the biggest resistance movements in Europe, so is something not mentioned. So we can then talk also about some other things, but. Now I give the floor to my colleague, to Hania, and so we can show how we use the issue of Holocaust as a glasses for us to analyze the perceptions of Poles and Poland and Polish history in German society.
Mateusz, can you? So my part, the starting point for this part is the quotation from the book by Tony Judd, Post-War. And if you remember, his epilogue, I mean, the epilogue of this book is about this reflection on what does it mean today, what is today this entry ticket to this European community. And he's saying about this word extermination, and the recognition of the Holocaust is this entry ticket. And one of the last sentences is the recovered memory of the Jews becomes the fundamental definition and guarantor of Europeans' restored humanity. And we wanted to start this looking into our research and these questions and answers of German respondents with this reflection on how to measure today the Europeanness. And of course, this way how also in Poland, in all countries in Europe, we recognize our being the part of this, what was before this Western world, by recognition of Jewish victims. And here, let us first see these results regarding the number and categories of victims of the German occupation. And we see here German civilians, Polish civilians, Jews, homosexuals, and Roma Sinti. And the respondents, they were trying to catch the number of each group of the victims. And we see here, first reflection is that Jews, for Germans, this is the largest number of victims of the Second World War. So we see almost 84% who recognize that it's between 1 to 10 millions of victims. Another reflection is that we see that Roma Sinti is even the larger group than Polish civilians, but what is, I think, also very interesting, that we see that German civilians and Polish civilians, they have almost the same figures. I mean, this is something super, super similar. And we, coming back, because we already told that, that the question of recognizing the Jewish victims is a very important part of this today being European, belonging to Western world. Sorry, I mean, it's not a good notion, but we see that first, of course, is fairly widespread and very widespread. It's Germany, but two countries, the next countries, Soviet Union and Poland, it's as usually, even if we know that Europe was generally anti-Semitic before the war, we see this difference between Western Europe and Eastern Europe. There are also very interesting questions on collaboration in particular countries, and the question on how strong was the social, military, and political resistance to the German occupation. This is also interesting because it's wider meaning of what resistance means. I mean, it's not about underground organizations. And in first question, we see that generally for German respondents, it's the whole countries, they had the same, almost the same level of collaboration with German Occupy. And in second question, we see that slightly France, in opinion, according to this data, we see that slightly France had stronger resistance towards Germany, and then, but it's almost the same level, Poland and France. And we see, I want to draw your attention, that we see that for German respondents, Germany and Denmark, Czechoslovakia, Netherlands, it's almost the same, and Germany and Greece, the same resistance. This question, it was already discussed also in Germany, but we invented that we want to check it because our education team had this experience many times, that when they ask about that, usually most of the students, they answered that 3 million of Jews, they were German citizens. And it turned out that this question, which country do you think the millions of Jews came from, here we see that the main number is from Germany, and then 28% Poland. And so most Germans have no idea how many German Jews were killed, and somehow they incorporate the numbers of the murdered Polish Eastern Jews as their victims. And we said that the question about this recognition of Holocaust is the one point, but the second point, which I think Professor Michał Łuczewski, who has published the book on moral capital in 2017, he created such a concept that we can analyze the memory of the Second World War in various societies with this recognition that the particular societies they gather this moral capital. In this case, and especially he's drawing attention to this German experience, that Germans, they built their moral capital on this fact that they worked through their history, their guilt, they overcame this dark shadow past. And this is this memory of this change, yes, of the conversion. And this is the source of this moral capital. And we see it very precisely, and not only in our survey, that most of Germans, they think about themselves that they have worked through this very dark history, and when we ask them, should, for example, can Poles learn from the Germans about how to do this Aufarbeitung, they answered yes, but it's better even to see it in 2020, which I would like to here to recall this survey from Die Zeit, where the question was that Germany is a model for overcoming the Nazi past and can be a model for other countries. And here we see that fully agree and rather agree is almost 68. So, and here on the right you see our survey. So we here this Germany has fully come to terms or overcame the worked through the past is almost 54%. This is moral capital based on this working through. So we have this another point about how probably German respondents see themselves, but there is question which shows, I think, another dimension of this what moral capital can be, because then absolutely the simplest way how the moral capital is based is the source of it is to be a victim. Yes, it's like from psychology, the typical situation. And we have some questions about first the question if how severe were the penalties imposed by the Germans in the particular countries, and we see the answers that when the one was for this administrative punishment to 5, which was a death penalty, we see that 4 and 5, it's in Germany, the German respondents think that in Germany it was the most dangerous to do anything to help Jewish neighbors. And next is Poland and then Soviet Union. But when we looked only at this data about this question, only death, this 5th answer, 5th, this death penalty, it's 46 to 31. So the question also, who was responsible for the Holocaust, we gave the 3 possibilities to answer, and Germans and their collaborators were similarly guilty. It's 57%, mainly Germans 34%. And I think we can ask if this problem of being as a member of the European community, this what Tony Judd said, what in 21st century means to be in this moral sense, in moral dimension, is that first we recognize Jewish victims, and we see that it's a very important part of what Germans know or think about Second World War. This is the most important group of victims. Then, second, that we can assume that Germans recognize themselves also as victims, and they build their moral capital on this assessment that we worked through the history. This question is also interesting. I just put your attention to this reflection that when we ask, do you know any concentration extermination camps, the answers were usually this German concentration camp that are in Germany right now. Yes, there's almost lack of knowledge about extermination camps, Treblinka, Sobibór, only Auschwitz-Birkenau is recognized. And we think there is also, I mean, what from my side I would like to finish my part is that already mentioned book by Tatiana Tensmeyer. She was working 10 years on this question about German occupation of Europe, that this is something which completely doesn't exist in German awareness about what the war in fact was, how did it look like. And she is saying that people say never again Auschwitz, never again war. However, a never again occupation can hardly be heard. Despite all the progress made in remembrance policy, the occupation has so far only been part of the German remembrance policy discourse to a limited extent. And perhaps this research shows that understanding and this education on experience of occupation can step by step change the German approach also to Poland, but also to Eastern Europe.
And this is to be complemented by the fact that not only the research on occupation is needed, but also so there are some other desiderata. So this is the question, the open question with spontaneous answers. The question was about what is needed according to respondents. So what kind of commemoration in the public sphere in Germany is needed now. And we see that there are certain groups of victims mentioned, every legitimately, of course. However, so the characteristic of these groups is that they belong, so to say, to the German society. I mean that they are also the subject or the object or subject, yes, of public debate and previous commemoration. So our argumentation goes that the previous commemoration implies the commemorations, for example, so the monuments, Denkmäler, Gedenkstätten, so they justifying the need for further commemoration. And the debate about that certain groups are, so to say, by elites given as someone who is worthy to commemorate is understood by respondents, and they give, for example, such answers as Sinti Roma, so as homosexuals, as so this is as I said. So these are groups already commemorated, and our argumentation lies that we need also commemorations for other groups, for example, for national groups. So, and this is also the voice in the debate about the Polish monument. So about the monument for Polish victims, not only for Polish victims, for Ukrainians and other too. Yes, I mean that some categories of victims are not visible, and we need them visible in the public sphere in order to be remembered and for respondents to be really sure they need further commemoration. And the last word is again about this ignorance and absence of knowledge. So absence of knowledge is something politically crucial. So this is something what we should do about. Lack of knowledge is not shouldn't be taken for granted. So of course, so we understand and we know that such research project, for example, is not especially easy for respondents. So this is something which is rather difficult. And of course, so the methodology of social science can ways to deal with it. However, so we understand, okay, so this is difficult, but we know, so this fact which we know is that there is much ignorance and much absence of knowledge in German society as regards the Second World War and Holocaust. And we think this has really something to do with the observation of Salzburg that this universalization of memory is also controversial in that sense that we need also historical facts. And this is what our research, I think, asserts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the very interesting lecture about this also very important topic. I suggest that first probably we hear the commentary to your study, and after we combine the question and answer together. So now we hear Professor Felix Ackermann. He is at the moment, so from 2022, professor at Fern University for Public History in Hagen. Felix Ackermann studied culture studies and history and political science at European University Viadrina in Frankfurt Oder and at the London School of Economics and Political Studies. In his dissertation, supervised by Karl Schlögl, analyzed the state construction of ethnicity and urban spaces in Belarus. And he is also author of a couple papers and books, and one of the, so very relevant for our conference, for example, together with Agnieszka Pufelska, Preußen Postkolonial, Themenhefte Geschichte und Gesellschaft were published. And now we hear a commentary on the study results of the research by Hanna Radziejowska and Mateusz Fałkowski, and after you have possibility to make question. Okay.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I was actually asked by other colleagues why I'm going to Pilecki Institute, and the main answer is that my own grandfather Gottfried was an officer of the Wehrmacht fighting in the East. And it took 4 decades until I found out, asking my parents to apply for the documents at the Stasi document center, that I found out that he was not just a member he was not just serving in Wehrmacht, but also he was a member of Stahlhelm and of SR, and so it took a very long time, even in a family with a historian, in charge of these issues. And similarly, in the family of my partner, actually, it was only during the pandemia that her mother, after we already spent 5 years in Warsaw with our family, she took out an album of her own father documenting actually the full way from Berlin to the east, including very interesting and remarkable pictures from small places in central Poland, but also the ruins of Warsaw as something you go and visit on the weekend, you know, as a Wehrmacht soldier. And it also includes some bits of Jews doing forced labor at the Wisła River in Warsaw, and it came as a surprise in a family which is deeply interrelated with Poland, and we are proud that our children speak Polish these days. But for me, this is an important reason to think about the results of your study, and also to try to combine it with my ongoing research in Hagen. So the Berlin branch of the Pilecki Institute is located directly on Pariser Platz, next to the French embassy and close to the British and US embassies. For me, it's an expression of the Polish Republic's new self-confidence in pursuing active, self-determined remembrance work and history policy from this particular spot. This is remarkable because there's a long history of asymmetry between Germany and Poland. On the one hand, this is the long-term consequence of the prehistory of Prussian land seizure, internal colonization, the Kulturkampf, and National Socialist persecution. Beyond the historical asymmetry of violence, there is a present-day asymmetry in the aftermath of the violence that emanated from Prussia and the German Reich. This includes the legal reappraisal. After 1945, the People's Republic of Poland convicted more Polish citizens who collaborated with the German occupiers than the Federal Republic of Germany tried German Nazi persecutors all over the after-war period. That's one of the answers to the question in the room. We don't have as much trial documents actually to learn from. As I started from, this includes the knowledge in the families. In many Polish families, the consequences of World War II are clearly named. Many German families do not know where their grandfather was deployed, let alone what he did there. A particular feature of the German perspective on the Second World War is the conviction that German society has successfully overcome and come to terms with this history. The key word, and something like a very magic in a German context, is Erinnerungskultur, something we see crumbling these days, but still we believe it exists. If there were a world champion title in coming to terms with the past, the Federal Republic would be playing for the title again every season in the virtual Champions League. Questioning this position of strength of a neighbor that has been using soft power to convey its own view on the past at home and abroad for several decades is an example of the symbolic demand for symmetry in relations between Berlin and Warsaw. I found it helpful for the discussion for the coming days to start with a really simplistic definition of colonialism as a political system for the permanent creation and maintenance of systemic asymmetries between two societies. In this sense, a conscious, active reduction of asymmetry is a mode of decolonization. Post-colonial theories provide us with an analytical framework that allows us to precisely categorize the speaker's position in this setup, which is in itself, of course, dynamic and not static for ages. And in the case of the survey presented, the attitude of this study presented by Hanna Radziejowska and Mateusz Fałkowski changes their own position as speakers vis-à-vis the German society in a very active and impressive way. By asking very precise questions and producing empirical results, they question the German narrative of the World Championship for Bewältigung and overcoming. They always do this in relation to Poles and Polish victims, but contextualize their questions broadly enough so that the answers do not exclusively reveal a gap in the German perception of Poland. It is more complicated, however, because almost all the answers initially reveal the degree of ignorance in German society at large about the concrete form of National Socialism as a German form of governance. The greatest contradiction revealed by the study is the sharp contrast between the conviction that other societies can learn from Germany, which is openly expressed by over a third of respondents, and the incorrect assessment of, just as an example, of the role of the death penalty for saving Jews in the occupied territories. I'm myself currently working on an analytical concept for a history of the Federal Republic of Germany, which I call post-national socialist, in reference to inner German discourses from post-migrant analytical terms such as post-Nazi society. The aim here is to take a clearer look at the temporal dimension of how society deals with violent pasts. Understanding the Federal Republic as a post-Nazi society means, on the one hand, recognizing its attempts to overcome the past. There are numerous important social and cultural practices of active engagement with National Socialism, and I'm not questioning this. The aim of these different forms in the East and West was to create a permanent semantic difference between German society in the present and National Socialist society of the past. This is why, to this day, Germans always speak of Nazis and NS when it comes to crimes committed by the German Reich, as a German state and German society. And it's still, you know, a semantic shock if you say German instead of National Socialist. And of course, that's something I learned in Poland, and in my work tried to bring this optics and adopt it to a post-war history of Germany. National Socialism is referred to the past in a variety of ways in order to semantically and temporally separate itself from it. On the one hand, Germany today, as a democratically constituted community, is strongly based on this assumption that we have long been different society to Adolf Hitler's Volksgemeinschaft. But on the other hand, the Federal Republic not only took over the legal succession of the German Reich, but also assumed in many legal matters that the states were identical. So we are not just a successor, but we are identical with the German Reich. And this is something what fell out of the conscious of German public at all. Like I was quite shocked to find out myself doing this research. And there is another problem that becomes clearer in a post-National Socialist perspective. If it is central to the democratic constitution of the present to distance oneself comprehensively from National Socialism, the reference to the 12 years of Nazi rule remains omnipresent. The compact study impressively shows that this linkage does not go hand in hand with a reliable level of knowledge about this phase of German history. It could be summarized as follows. German society is trying to distance itself from something that it no longer knows exactly what it was about. Concrete post-National Socialist practices for which there is evidence in the answers of the study presented is firstly the generous sharing of responsibilities. Germans are so burdened with bearing our own collective guilt that we consistently transfer responsibility to accomplices. In practice, this manifests itself in the fact that there is no single public event about Ukraine without a question about Stepan Bandera. Like it's 100% the case. Germans often know very little about the specific places where their own ancestors were deployed in Poland as members of Wehrmacht or other units. However, they are relatively well informed about Polish anti-Semitism. Actually, there is something like a hobby of German society at large, like to be well informed about this part of the history of German occupation. The figures in the survey clearly show what is the idea of the Holocaust as a European project. It implies the possibility of abdicating responsibilities to other societies. Secondly, we must understand that the post-war, like the aftermath of war, was a direct consequence of the Second World War. So in itself, the way how German society came to terms was still part of the aftermath of war. So why this is important? The systematic confrontation between East and West was fought with armed forces in surrogate theaters in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. In Europe, the division and freezing of the East-West conflict led to a creation of zones of symbolic exclusion. And I think that's really important a point to explain some of the figures here, that Central and Eastern European was out of sight, both for West Germany, for West German society, but also for most people in the GDR. As a result, the places where the Wehrmacht and SS were deployed also fell out of active memory. Short commercial break. Sorry, I forgot. I will hand over these leaflets. Yeah, so Hannah asked me to comment. I asked if I can promote the event tomorrow, but I'm organizing. Why I'm doing this commercial break? I'm organizing a discussion on Kharkiv under fire tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. You can take a direct bus from here to Zoo. The intense fighting in eastern Ukraine, in which hundreds of thousands of German soldiers actually lost their life during World War II, is not part of our knowledge of Eastern Europe today. So during the months-long Russian siege of Bakhmut, for instance, not a single German newspaper has mentioned that this city used to have a different name, that it was site of a particularly cruel massacre of the Jewish community in the Artyomsk, Minsk, you know. So there's a war going on, but it is very obvious that we are not able to connect the ongoing war, even linking the specific sites to the places where Wehrmacht were fought the German war of this destruction. So my main thought is that the public debate in German society has not been accompanied by private reappraisal. The lack of knowledge within families is so great because the perpetrator generation has remained silent and because subsequent generations have generally not undertaken, in many, many cases, any research, investigation, or reconstruction of their own. There is therefore a culture of remembrance that takes place in public, in memorial sites, and on days of remembrance. However, private households are rarely a resonating space in which family history is directly related to the history of Second World War. It is striking that the images of the Russian invasion, the full-scale invasion, I mean, in February 2022, have triggered something in many, many German families. The last war generation remembers the end of the war, and their descendants are now publicly discovering the transgenerational transmission of German trauma. So this is something not covered in the survey, but I found really striking that we are now that the images of the war actually triggered our own coming to terms with our own trauma, because there are actually German trauma from the war. They also have been not covered in this process of making Erinnerungskultur. And this late, and what is also remarkable, and I think some of it you cover in the survey, is that this late processing of family history is not usually accompanied by naming the persecution of forced laborers from Poland, from Ukraine, from Belarus, also from Russia, Soviet prisoners of war from all republics, and other crimes that were part of everyday life in millions of households and businesses in Germany. So there's a lack of knowledge about the occupation because soldiers didn't speak about it when they came back, but we also didn't cover actually the local micro knowledge about the persecution of forced laborers and Soviet prisoners of war, which took place all over Germany actually, and it was present in every village, in every town, in every factory, and in almost in many households at least. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much for the two very interesting lectures. We have any question?
Well, thank you for this very interesting presentation. I would like to know a little bit more about the sample. You mentioned you were interviewing 2,000 people up to the age of 75, but what did they have? What background did they have? I would like to know more about this because it makes a difference if they have an academic background or they have a blue-collar workers background or white-collar background. That's one thing. It would also make a difference from my point if you interview people in Western Germany or more in Eastern Germany, for instance. Yes. I would like to hear more about this. And actually, I wondered when you showed Auschwitz, and that was only 40% who know about it. So Auschwitz is more than only a concentration camp today. It's iconic in many ways. At least we know after the war all the discussions. Adorno, for instance, yes, he said discussions went beyond Auschwitz. Yeah, Auschwitz. After Auschwitz, we cannot believe in a God anymore. For instance, was said, and so Auschwitz is more than only a concentration camp. Now, in present times. So I would like more about the background. Who was asked these questions? Thank you.
So thank you for this question. So it was the representative sample of German society. So I mean, so for people living in Germany. So it means that this sociological firm, so Ipsos, has a panel of people representing different social demographic strata. So young, old, living in big cities, small towns, in villages, so of different levels of education. So this is something which is representative for the 2,000 people who are a mirror of the society, so to say. So this is something like that. And this is this idea of social research, so of this demoscopic social surveys, is that you have such a sample which is a mirror of the society, so in the sense. Another question, so you asked, is so this has the dimension. This question has also other dimension. So whether there were any big differences in answers of people, for example, different social strata, of different socio-demographic backgrounds, and we have to analyze it more in deeply. But the first analysis shows that there's that these answers are not so much differentiated by the social demographic census. So this is not. I would have to go into detail. We don't have time now for it, but I have very with pleasure. I can answer your question so later. And the second so.
I would add only one remark that, for example, the answer on this question about death penalty is in German society the same level among people with high education, almost, I mean, just a little bit lower than this general when we see whole society.
Yeah, this is exactly what I wanted to say. That the higher education doesn't means, in the light of this survey, that people with higher education so know much more than others. Yes? So this is something like that. And your second question relating with regards to Auschwitz, you are correct. So this is Auschwitz's icon, and I would say that my suggestion, so before this we conducted the survey, was that even more people would be, so that this Auschwitz would that every other place of concentration, any other camp would be in the shadow of Auschwitz. Yes, that's something that this iconization of Auschwitz has some negative also consequences, and in that sense. And I wouldn't say that so, because we had, for example, answers with Treblinka or with Sobibor without Auschwitz. It means that probably these people knew about Auschwitz. So that this is something like we can differentiate. But I would say that the most interesting result from that question for me was that and also in the light of the topic of this conference, is that relatively small number of places, smaller places from Eastern Europe, is known to the public in Germany. So I mean that it should be something done that even more people in future remember about not only about Auschwitz but also about other death and concentration camps.
Thank you very much. Just brief questions. Question to Mateusz and Hania. Can you name one thing that surprised you the most in this study? Think about it, because I have another question quick to Professor Ackermann. You mentioned that there is a continuity in terms of international law between German Reich and Federal Republic. But then you mentioned something that surprised you the most, that is a certain legacy and continuity in underlying, I don't know, structures or institutions between both states that struck you the most. And then you cut, and I got very curious about what did you, if you could elaborate like 1-2 sentences about that to direct me, that would be great. Thank you very much.
For me, the most, what surprised me the most, I think it was this answer on death penalty. I mean, I was sure that, for example, Germans recognize Jewish victims as general German citizens, but it means, because it triggered me this reflection that it means that, because in Poland we love these discussions about, I mean, this is the favorite discussion, how dangerous it was to help Jews. I mean, that this even, I would say, like, this is the moral capital that was built, that it was so difficult and there were people who did it and so on and so on. And for me, it was surprising that in German society, this reflection how probably this difficult was is quite on the high level. Yes, it means even if they recognize not in these proper places, because it was Poland, Ukraine, today Yugoslavia. Yes, the places that it was the most dangerous places. But this. When we talk about anti-Semitism or what was possible during the war, about collaborators, this aspect, I think, it's still a lot to discuss. And the second thing, it's the story which Mateusz made such a remark about Stolpersteinen, that it opened in me also. So, I mean, why Germans think that German Jews were the largest number of victims. So, one of the assumptions is that this generally in Berlin or generally in everywhere, there are a lot of places where these Jewish citizens, German Jewish citizens, are commemorated. And this experience of reflection, okay, that they were our neighbors, is so intense that then you answer in this way. And it made, for me, in Poland, for example, it triggered me that, perhaps this is also when we discuss the problem how to commemorate Polish Jewish victims and Holocaust in Poland, that this having balance, yes, discussion how to commemorate, not to make the impression that all Poles help Jews. It was like, I mean, from this German survey came to reflection on Poland, for example. Yes, this was for me that if it works in this way, that it's true that we have to really think how to in a wise way to commemorate these people who are exceptional, yes, and heroic, and how to commemorate Jewish victims.
So maybe I will continue on the line took by Hania and said that. So my surprise was that in a way, paradoxically, Germans think about their experience or their experience of war. As if it was in Poland. I mean that as if they were Polish. So because they think they had no choice. They think there was very much repression. So there was the most repressive environment overall Europe. And okay, and in a way, in such a German-Polish comparison, in the light of this survey, we can make a conclusion that okay, so that Poles, in a way, they had in this perception, in this self-awareness. So according to Germans, Poles had more freedom to act and less repression than Germans had, and this is one thing. Another one is about the notion of nation. So because in a way, so the one of the talking points of German debate about commemoration, about Erinnerungskultur, cultures of remembrance, is that such a rather negative approach to the category of nation. And I can understand it, why, and I can follow it, but in a way, this survey shows that German respondents appreciate and applaud to the category of nation, the German nations. I mean that all the members mentioned. So I mean that for example, that if the most Jews came from Germany, they were members of so in a way, of this German community, and this is quite paradoxical, I think, and it was something surprising.
I have to correct you because nobody after 45 used the word nation anymore both in East and West. We see in the constitutions in 49 that there are two different ways of putting it, the Volk, you know, so it was the Volk. Yeah? But to answer your question, I try to explain students in study material. We are a distance learning university, so I have to come up with written material, and I try to explain what temporality is about with analyzing the example of the peace conference, which was supposed to take place in the future, and was part of the open, non-resolved German question, which was actually visible in Berlin because of the wall next door. And then this tricky way how Kohl, Genscher, Reagan, and all the other guys managed to not to hold a peace conference, but to answer the German question. And thinking about it, I was really intrigued by this political decision in West Germany to uphold legal direct continuity, so not inheritance but direct continuity, because it would have been possible to say the German Reich crushed, everything is destroyed. It was a way of self-destruction, which it was actually. But there was a political decision not to do so, just for two reasons. The main reason was the claim to the Eastern Territories in East Germany. Back then, still this was meant to be Silesia, Pomerania, and so on. But later on, also the claim to the legal, the claim to what we call today East Germany. And of course, the Allies being interested back in 45 and to take reparations. So it's linked to the reparation question. You know, if you have a discontinuity, you don't have to pay. And then, so this goes back to the question how we did organize reunification of Germany, not putting this question on the table, you know.
We have any question more, or yeah? Then the last one, because we are over time. Very
Hi, when I was listening about your survey, well, it's shocking, but I was not surprised about the answers actually, because I mean, if you live in Berlin, and if you deal with history, especially German-Polish history, you live these things on a daily basis, and I do. I see these things in my experience, in my work, and I do a lot of projects which have to do with history of the Second World War and the occupation, and especially Polish resistance fighters. And that's, for example, a subject which is completely ignored by like a mainstream German historical society. Well, yeah, they don't want to listen about it. And I can share just one little experience that some years ago we were trying to, and we are Polish migrants, so I'm not German. Okay, so it's probably a difference that if you as a Polish migrant try to do something about or commemorate a Polish resistance fighter, a woman, well, then it's quite, you reach a glass ceiling in German institutions. they don't really think it's worth it. I've had some answers. They said, no, she was not worth it. We wouldn't do like a tafel, like a Gedenktafel, like a place that you write. So of course, in the end, yeah, you do it differently. So in the end, we tried a different method. If this systematic or institutional glass ceiling was so strong, we just bought a tree and we planted a tree, like a Gedenkbaum, like a tree in memory of this woman. So you can always find a way. There will be a short question to you. But I just wanted to quickly say to German historians, which if there are any present, don't be scared, don't be afraid of Polish artists or migrants when we talk about history, because history belongs to all of us, and maybe sometimes a voice of somebody else might simply shift a perspective. We are not scary, we don't bite. We just tell maybe different stories about Polish resistance fighters, not only about Polish victims, which obviously are there. So my question to you is, okay, the survey, what will you do with this text, with this research? Will you, well, send it with a pigeon to German history institutions, or will it, well, what will you do with it? And do you think anybody will read it, apart from us?
This research was already discussed a little bit in German media, and of course we are going to publish the whole report with much more data that we collected in this research. For us, I think there are 2 points. First, that we are here already, this is the 5th year here as Pilecki Institute, and we always had this feeling that we are discussing like it's journalism, yes? We discuss about our assumption, about what we discuss, I mean, what are our experience, for example, in our education work and so on, but it's never, you know, it's never described in this scholar way with this research. So this is perhaps the starting point of really perhaps deeper understanding each other. And the second point is because we really work a lot with the schools, with in Berlin, in Brandenburg, this knowledge helps us. I mean, this is something which we discuss in how to build, how to make good workshop lessons and so on, how to make scenarios, how to also reach out our German partners. And I mean, also it's like, yes, it's worthy to meet and, you know, I mean, this history, of course, it's not possible to know everything. It's not, I've never thought that it's possible that in German schools it will be a lot about Polish resistance, Polish, I don't know, Polish history. But I think what we are trying to reach is like catching these points, these points of values, yes, that we can get closer and discuss it. And I think it's also about that really we have, for us, it means we have a lot to do. I mean, this is promising.
Just very briefly, maybe didn't underline enough that the value of your study is actually that you provide empirical material. Because in memory studies, when you analyze societies as such, on a global level, it's very hard to prove actually any kind of hypothesis. So 50% of my work is without footnotes because I just claim something I observe. And then it's really helpful to have this kind of survey, which we would not be able to actually conduct from a German university for various reasons. So this is really valuable, and I could myself imagine to use it in this we call it Studienbrief, for the students in Hagen. So usually it was in earlier times sent by mail, now it's online in Moodle. I could actually imagine to use this survey and as part of my reasoning about post-National Socialist society, but even more I would find it interesting if students had the task to analyze it themselves. So just to give them the results and then to give tasks to students to come up with their own ideas about it and to analyze them. And to finish, I wanted to invite all Polish artists and activists to Hagen, actually. We are very open for cooperation. Recently, I organized a party for our students, and it took place in a restaurant called Na Zdrowie, and the DJ was called DJ Partyzant. And it turned, and he was a local Pole from Solingen, and of course it turned out that his grandparent was fighting in the Armia Krajowa, and he used the evening to tell the story to our students as well. So please feel welcome.
Thank you very much. I think we have to continue with the next point, with our keynote. You have also possibility during the breaks, to discuss with the panelists. So now we start with Franziska Davies, Keynote Paths and Decolonization of Eastern Europe. To the person of Franziska Davies, she studied Eastern Europe history, medieval history and philosophy at the University of Munich. Since October 2016, Davies is a postdoctoral research assistant at the Department of Eastern Europe History, Faculty of History in Munich, and her postdoctoral research project Beyond East and West examines the multiple perception and struggles in Poland, Britain, and Soviet's Ukraine between the 1918 and 1990. And now, welcome, Franziska, and we can continue. Start.
I'll take that as a yes. Okay. So thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very sorry that I can't be there in person. My son decided to become ill just as we were planning to leave for Berlin. I also realized through the introduction that I really should update the information on my website at the University of Munich, because my project has changed to some degree. I mean, the research I have done on workers' movements in the 1980s will now be part of a broader project, a book project about the end of the Soviet Union, taught through a particularly from a Polish and Ukrainian perspective. So in line with the theme of this conference, an attempt to tell the story of the end of the Soviet Union from a decolonial perspective. I probably don't have to mention in this room that the question of decolonizing Eastern Europe, decolonizing the field of Eastern European studies, has become an issue with new urgency after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. And I would like to talk about three topics in this respect, which are of course connected to some degree. First, on the question of Central Eastern Europe as an object of German colonialism. Second, of the legacies of a joint Russian-German imperialism at the expense of Eastern Central Europe. And a third question of how this affects our field and what a decolonization of our field could look like. I will first start with a question of definition. I mean, we all know that there is a huge body of literature on the question: what is colonialism, what is post-colonialism, what is decolonialism, and I am opting in our field as of Eastern and Eastern Central European history for a very broad approach, which Michael Chodakowski brought forward a couple of years ago in an article he wrote on the history of the Russian Empire as the history of a colonial empire which always denied its colonial identity. And I cite, while all conquests could produce empires, not all empires are colonial. A colonial empire is defined by possessing a specific periphery whose inhabitants are conceptualized as inferior, primitive, barbaric, or generally the other, that can be both be exploited and improved. And in this regard, of course, we can apply this definition of colonialism or colonial empire to Prussia or to 19th century Germany, where at least since the partitions of Poland, or since the partitions of Poland at the end of the 18th century, Poland, Eastern Central Europe became an kind of policy field of practical policies of German colonialism. And we have so many experts in this room that I hardly have to dwell on this question. But of course, there were, as you know, periods of active policies of Germanization. And then on a different level, also towards the Russian Empire, and this book was already mentioned, we have the book by Larry Wolff about the imagining Eastern Europe. And here we can see that the Russian Empire, by not being actually an object of German colonialism, it was still kind of described often described in a colonial fashion. With regards to Ukraine, the perhaps most obvious period of direct German colonial policies towards Ukraine was during the collapse or after the collapse of the Russian Empire, with the German state or Germany on a superficial level supporting Ukrainian independence, but actually really envisioning the establishment of a Ukrainian puppet state open for colonial exploitation by Germany. The most clear example, and again, this has been touched upon already by the previous speakers, of German colonialism in Eastern Europe is, of course, the Second World War. By now, though that has not always been the case, but in recent decades, I think a consensus has emerged in the scholarly field that the Second World War was not only a war which was a nationalist, racist war against Poland and the Soviet Union, but also a colonial war of exploitation, where there's a clear cultural, ethnic, racial hierarchy towards the people who were singled out for subjugation, with the Jews and Roma and Sinti at the bottom of the hierarchy, those who were singled out for complete annihilation. And to varying degrees, also the so-called Slavische Untermenschen, the Slavic subhumans, who were at best envisioned as slaves for the coming German settlers in Eastern Europe, this Schlagwort of this formula of Lebensraum, but also very often people who were thought of as unnecessary eaters, unnötige Esser in German, a term which you find regularly in the German sources, and also of course the direct assault on Polish elites, for example. So really the destruction of the Polish state at the heart of the German war, and also this of course very radicalized idea that all these cultures, peoples were inferior. Now in a very racialized language, but this idea of inferiority, of course, also very present already in the 19th century. The forced laborers are another example, with up to 2 million of them stemming from Ukraine. As with other examples we have just heard about in the surveys presented in the previous speeches, this realization, or this kind of scholarly consensus which has emerged in recent years, has not really gotten through to German societal knowledge. So I think and I agree with Felix Ackermann, that such surveys as the one presented just previously are very important. And another interesting topic for such a survey would indeed be the question of how present it is for German society that this was also a colonial war. It is very often exclusively linked to kind of the radicalization of German nationalism to National Socialism, but not so much how much a colonial project for Central Europe, for Eastern Europe, and then from 1941 onwards also towards Russia and the Soviet Union, Ukraine and Belarus was really also at the heart of a Nazi ideology and how it was carried out by large parts of German society who shared this notion of the inferior East ready for kind of predestined for German exploitation. And instead, we have many blind spots. Again, this fits very neatly with what was presented before. So this idea of German kind of the German superpower of remembrance, which other nations can adhere to, is quite ironic given the fact how many blind spots still exists with regard to the Second World War. In a way, one can say that the Auschwitz, which has become, of course, a symbol of the Holocaust in German memory culture, is not really connected to the events and practices and policies of the Second World War in Eastern Europe, how the war of annihilation against Poland and the Soviet Union actually made the Holocaust possible. And equally, and this again fits very neatly to the service presented, how Auschwitz also overlooks how many of the Soviet Jews in particular, so in occupied Ukraine, Belarus, and also Lithuania, were actually not murdered in the gas chambers, but were murdered in the so-called Holocaust by bullets after the Wehrmacht would occupy a village, and the squadrons of the SS would move in, and often in cooperation with the Wehrmacht would execute the Jews in killing squads within a few days. We can talk about why this is not remembered. I would argue that one of the main points is that the kind of that it's more. It would have to remembering this would mean a much more serious reckoning with the German past. In a way, you can. It is possible, even if also not correct, to reduce the death in the concentration camps and the gas chambers to a small group of fanatical Nazis. And this is not representative of larger parts of German society, whereas this is not possible with the Holocaust by bullets, where the so-called normal common soldier of the Wehrmacht was at least a witness, but very often somebody who helped to murder the Jews or the partisans, the so-called partisans. Hardly at some point possible to disconnect from anti-Semitism and Jewish victims in Belarus. Another blind spot, of course, would be the so-called fire villages, so the villages predominantly in Ukraine and Belarus, where also the SS very often, together with the Wehrmacht, would move in their fight against alleged or real partisans, and would simply kill all the civilian population of a village. Another blind spot, and this is where I come to my second point, the question of a joint German-Russian imperialism at the expense of Eastern Central Europe, is that the so-called Russland-Feldzug, so the battle against Russia, was in fact not against Russia, but against the Soviet Union. So this cultural Russification of the Soviet Union in German imaginary dates even further back, again to at least since the 18th century, with the partition of Poland. So some blind spots with regard to the Second World War are directly linked to this history of joint German-Russian imperialism, colonialism in East and Central Europe. And here too, I would argue, and this has direct political repercussions which we have seen in recent decades with regards to Germany's policies towards Russia and Ukraine, that Germany has not, on a societal level, really dealt at all with this legacy of a joint Russian-German imperialism. So up until the full-scale invasion, it was more or less the norm for German politicians to stress and to kind of aspire to good German-Russian relations without even considering how this might look from a Polish, a Baltic, or a Ukrainian perspective. To just cite one example of a very well-known and high-level politician at the end of 2014, the then foreign minister, now president of Germany, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, was interviewed by the popular news magazine Der Spiegel about his position on Russia and Ukraine. And this interview is very telling because it shows you how colonial stereotypes, how colonial thinking was very, very much embedded. Oh, sorry. My husband is trying to ring me. I'm very sorry. Sorry. I somehow switched off my phone, but not my computer, where I also have Signal installed, and now he's trying to ring me there. I'm very sorry. Sorry. Where was I? Yeah, Frank-Walter Steinmeier. Okay, my favorite topic. He was asked in this interview about his position on Russia. And in this interview, at the end of 2014, so after the Russian occupation of Crimea, after its attack in Donbass, so basically after the war started against Ukraine, Russia's war against Ukraine, which was never very rarely conceptualized as a war in German public discourse, but rather figured as the quote-unquote Ukraine-Krise, the Ukrainian crisis. Again, I would say something where you can really see colonial thinking at work. He was talking about how much he wanted good Russian-German relations. Ukraine only figured as the kind of origin point of violence, and not in connection with Russian violence, but with the violence on Maidan. And he referred in a positive way to the German Russland complex, a title of a book by German historian Gerd Köhnen, which covered the period from 1900 to 1945, in which he addresses and analyzes this strange obsession with Germans have with Russia, really quite critically. And it was very interesting that Steinmeier turned this into something positive. Another example from the same politician was in 2021, when already as a president at that point, he defended the project of Nord Stream 2, which, as you all know, was from the start and very openly a Russian anti-Ukrainian project, and against which Poles and the Baltic states and Ukraine, of course, continuously warned, with the statement that it was an important project, not least because of the 27 million victims of the German war of aggression against the Soviet Union, which, of course, when you consider that millions of these victims stemmed from Ukraine, was just a staggering amount of ignorance and colonial thinking towards Ukraine, and the clear kind of prioritization of Russia at the expense of Belarus, of Ukraine. And so I'm pointing this out just to make clear how deep and how how deep this thinking was embedded, and how little it was critically reflected. And so to some extent still is. I can actually share a personal anecdote. I was a very fresh one, because last week I was in a public discussion with Wolfgang Ischinger, who was a high-ranking diplomat until he left office in Germany, and was then the president of the Munich Security Conference. And he was saying in this discussion how wonderful it was that during the Biden visit, Germany, France, the UK, and Britain had kind of come together as the actual heart of the West. And when I pointed out that I had not quite such a positive take, and that I thought that this table is clearly missing those countries in the European Union and in Europe who are now actually defending the Western project, or at the front of the Western project, and really getting ready to defend us, that is Baltic states, Poland, also the Czech Republic, he found this rather completely beyond the point. He just didn't understand at all what I was talking about. So this is still to some extent a matter of course. Another blind spot, which is directly linked to this joint Russian-German colonialism, is the question, of course, or the period between 1939 and 1941. So the joint occupation of Poland and the Baltic states in the case of the Soviet Union in this period. And this is quite startling, given that this experience of a double occupation is such a central part of the Polish remembrance of the war, and that it is so little really known and considered in Germany. And again, I can share some personal experiences, and I'm sure other people who deal with Eastern European history or Eastern Central European history in Germany can speak of similar experiences. When I do seminars for high school teachers on history, and I ask them at the beginning to write down the most important dates, the crucial dates of the Second World War. Basically, I don't think I've ever experienced anyone putting down this pact between the Soviet Union and Germany in 1939, in August 1939. Nor, and I'm very sure about this, nobody ever brought up the Soviet invasion of Eastern Poland a few weeks after the German attack on September 1st, 1939. With regard now to Belarus and Ukraine, and this is also very, you can really see this in the remarks by Frank-Walter Steinmeier, is the fact that this also the policies of repentance, of remembering, of accepting responsibility for the German guilt towards Eastern Europe was very, very much centered on Russia, on Moscow, at least until the full-scale invasion, and sometimes even today. So that Ukraine and Belarus were the main theaters of war in the war against the Soviet Union is beginning to get through, but this is really, I would argue, directly linked to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And we, as Germans, as a German society, we really ask ourselves why it took this for us to really open some of our eyes in that respect, and also why scholarship did not get through to the public in this respect. And to give you a very concrete example of this kind of Russification also of the Soviet Union in popular culture, a couple of years ago, there was a big TV production in the German broadcasting house, I think it was ZDF, which was very, very much lauded in the kind of German newspapers, called Unsere Väter, unsere Mütter, Our Fathers, Our Mothers. Perhaps some of you have seen it because it also caused quite an uproar in Poland, because the only role given to Poles in this deeply problematic film, for many reasons, about the German war against the Soviet Union and Poland, was the role of anti-Semites. So there's one scene with the Armia Krajowa where they are basically only presented as anti-Semites. The same goes for Ukrainians, who are only presented as a Ukrainian anti-Semitic mob. And also quite interesting, I was rewatching it with students a couple of months ago to discuss it critically, of course. And one of the students took it upon himself to always Google the village, which was kind of put into the screen during the scenes. And it always said Russia in the film, and he would always Google and inform us that it was in fact mostly Belarus and sometimes Ukraine. So even though the German colonial project in Eastern Central Europe, and also from 1941 onward towards Eastern Europe, towards Russia, was completely defeated in 1945 through the complete military defeat of Germany. I think these examples make very clear how it, in policy, in the media, in culture, this kind of thinking was still very much alive and is still alive to some extent today. So this kind of continued fixation on Russia and the unofficial hierarchy existing with regard to the lives of Eastern Central Europeans and Eastern Europeans. And I think decolonization is very much also about questioning and realizing really this fixation. And this is where I come to my third point, the question is how colonial history shaped our own field. I'm speaking now mostly about Eastern European history or Eastern Central European history, because this is my field, but I'm sure many of this can be transferred also to other disciplines, such as, for example, literary studies or political science. My colleague Botakos Kasembikova, who I recommend highly as to read if you are interested in these questions of decolonization, always stresses the fact that this long history of German Russian colonialism also shaped our own field, how the centers of producing knowledge were colonial centers. So Moscow and St. Petersburg and Berlin, rather than, for example, Kiev or Minsk. And this has a long legacy, again, up until today, the question of where institutional partnerships lies and where also in journals, which topics are discussed from which perspectives. The many examples of institutes being labeled Russian studies and Eastern European studies, or Russian and Eurasian studies. To be fair, some of this already changed before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. But again, you can think of many examples where it really took this political aggression of Russia to change things. To give another example from the German context, while the German-Russian Historical Commission has existed for many decades, the German-Ukrainian Historical Commission was only set up in 2015 as a direct reaction to Russia's attack on Ukraine in 2014. And this is perhaps more the institutional way, but of course this is tied to cultural knowledge. And cultural knowledge in this respect also, I would argue, has a great influence. And I can, again, maybe share my own personal kind of path to Eastern and Eastern Central Europe, which I think was a very typical German one, because I, as a teenager, loved Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, authors I do not read that much these days, nor love them anymore. But this really was my path to studying Eastern European history, and this kind of dream of going to St. Petersburg to study there. And it was just simply would not have crossed my mind, because it was a complete blind spot for me to say, okay, I'm going to go to university and study Ukrainian language, or I'm going to go to Kiev or Warsaw to study there. I mean, there were people who did that, and they have my huge respect. But I think this kind of the legacy is also in the cultural sphere, that also culturally, Ukraine and Poland are so much less known than Russia, also really play a role. And then, in a way, I was lucky, really by coincidence, that I started studying at a university at an Institute for Eastern and Eastern Central European History, which was not Russocentric. But that is also, I think, still not the norm in Germany or other Western academic institutions. In 2022, there was a paper published, among others, by Yuri Gorodinchenko. It was translated to German and published in the Ukraine-Analyse. It was originally published in English, where he and two other colleagues looked into 13 top universities in academia and looked at their Eastern European, Russian, Eurasian studies program, And the empirical results really show how much Russia still dominated, in particular in the field of literary studies, with 82% of the student curriculum being devoted to Russian literature. My own field, history, did a little better, with only in quotation marks, 37% of the curricula being focused on Russia. But when you consider that the rest is kind of all of Eastern Europe and Eastern Central European languages and cultures and history combined, you still see this dominance of history, of Russia also in the historical field. And even in the case of literary studies, they had a poignant example of one of the institutions teaching Ukrainian author Andrei Kurkov as a Russian author. So in a way, you can say there are very good reasons to call for a decolonization of our field. And in particular, I would say that I have at least observed, maybe there are other arguments which I have not really yet met, but the arguments against the decolonization I have seen are really two. And I find both of them not convincing. The first one is that the calls for decolonization are an emotional or moral endeavor rather than a strictly intellectual or academic one. The second one, that the decolonization of our field will lead to the revival of nationalist master narratives, which we should by now have overcome. I'm generally very skeptical when it comes to the framing of an argument as an emotional response, because that in itself is, of course, culturally loaded. And it also ignores that our great colleague, Jan Plamper, who sadly died last year, who was a historian of emotions, he would be the first to now point out that we all have emotions, and to pretend that some arguments are emotional and others are not, kind of uphold a overcome dichotomy between emotional and rational. And of course, presenting certain arguments as emotional is also very often tied, not always, but very often tied to the person who brings them. So the idea of a very rational, laid back, non-aggressive, not too outspoken academic it's in itself a cultural construct still very much tied to the male elder German professor. So the younger you are, the less white you are, and if you're a female, you are very much more likely to be labeled as emotional or aggressive. But I also this is more like a general observation, also from personal experience. But I think the more the perhaps more important argument against this thesis that it's an emotional or moral endeavor is that, as I've argued before, the convention until now has been to center Russia. But a convention is marked by so many people just following the convention that nobody notices that it's a convention. The second characteristic of a convention is that it comes with a high social price to break it. And as we are all at this decolonization conference together, and I hope, and actually I also think that we won't pay a high price for it, I hope this convention is slowly starting to crumble. And this is really at the heart of what I would see as decolonizing, is not some kind of a new victim of Russian evil versus Central Eastern European or non-Russian liberation, but rather really about decentralizing the Russian perspective. And rather to the contrary than leading to some kind of a nationalist master narrative, it will lead to us understanding the Russian Empire, understanding the Soviet Union now, as you will see, I'm already talking much like a historian, it will lead to a better understanding of Russia. And here again, I mean, this will have to be followed up by empirical research, but seeing the potential destructiveness of imperialism, of Russian imperialism, becomes clearer when you don't only consider Russian sources and Russian perspective and only work in Russian state archives, but also in the non-Russian regions dominated by St. Petersburg and then Moscow in the last centuries. In the case of Germany, the most poignant and clear-cut and most precise analysis of what Russia was going to do came from Anna Veronika Wendland in December 2021, who has all her life worked on Ukraine. But of course, as a specialist of Ukraine, she also speaks Russian and Polish. And perhaps, I mean, Anna Veronika is also exceptionally intelligent. Perhaps this was also a reason. But I'm also convinced, and you could find other examples of this, that the most stark warnings about Russia's impending attack or radicalized attack on Ukraine came mostly from people who had dealt with Ukrainian history or from historians of Russia who had started to decenter Russia in there and really looked at the Ukrainian perspective, such as my colleague from Potsdam or our colleague from Potsdam, Jan C. Behrens. The tied to this is, of course, the question of whether we at all can describe the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union as colonial. And here I would argue that, yes, we can if we apply the definition brought forward by Michael Khodorkovsky cited in the beginning. The colonial structure is about the power structure and the kind of power hierarchy which is tied to it and which goes hand in hand with a ethnic, racial, linguistic hierarchy between the center and the so-called, or between the center and the peripheries. And I think both applies to the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union, even though they were special kinds of empires. But in this debate of whether we can at all frame the Russian Empire or the Soviet Union as colonial, in particular in regard to Eastern Central Europe, in regard to Ukraine, in regard to Poland, very often you hear this argument that it was different from real, in inverted commas, colonialism in the West, such as in France and in Britain, because in particular with regard to Ukraine, it was not based on the concept of otherness, but on the concept of sameness. So the Russian Empire and Russian nationalists claimed Ukrainians to be the same, rather than, for example, British colonial officials would not claim Indians as being the same as the English. But I think this is actually an example of, again, taking a very Western-centered perspective and declaring this the norm. We can, of course, find differences between the maritime colonial empires of modern times between in France and French and the British case. But this is not a counter-argument against Russian colonialism being part of a very much big part of the Russian Empire in the 19th century, also towards Ukraine and not only towards, for example, Central Asia. And so I think we need a broader definition of colonialism so that because we have seen in the past how this kind of concentration only on Western forms of imperialism has led to an underestimation of Russian colonialism up to the present. Now the question of how do we actually decolonize our field, and here I see really many challenges, and unfortunately I don't really have answers to how to overcome these challenges, because one of the legacies of this imperial and colonial structure is, of course, that, for example, again, I'm talking about my field, history of the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union. The state, the colonial state, defines what is worthy of keeping in the archives. Very often these sources are, more often than not, they are in Russian. So the whole kind of logic of being exposed mostly to Russian sources in state archives is kind of inherent in the history, because of the history of how these archives were kept and how they developed. And I'm not, of course, saying we should stop working in these archives, even though right now we can't and we shouldn't. But I'm not saying we should stop working with Russian sources. Obviously, that's not what decolonization is about, but rather, again, on decentering. But again, I can say from also from personal experience from my first book that this is these sources are more difficult to find. The languages are more difficult to learn, and even if you and I'm not really only talking about Ukrainian, which is not more difficult to learn, or Polish, which is a bit more difficult to learn, if you ask me. But I mean, the even more extreme case are languages like Crimean Tatar. So if you read, because colonialism is also about making the voices of the colonized disappear. So why was this narrative, colonial narrative of Crimea has always been Russian, so successful also in Germany and other parts of the Western world, is because centuries of Russian colonialism had made the voices of the Crimean Tatars more or less disappear. So all I can say as a kind of not particularly satisfying conclusion is that it will be a lot of work. It will need the institutionalization of languages at Western academic institutions. It will also need new organizational structures. And allow me again to also do a little promotion right at the end. I was, and also Teresa Handel, who is among you, I believe, was a founding member of the Ruta Association for Central, Southeastern, and Eastern European Baltic Caucasus, Central and Northern Asian Studies and Global Conversation. So you see alone in our title a very decolonial approach. And we have just published our second call for papers. The inaugural conference was in June this year in Ukraine, and it was the best conference of my life, and I can only encourage you all to apply. Thank you very much. I'm afraid I can't hear anything. You obviously heard me, but I can't hear you.
So
yeah, now.
Yes. So small technical problem. So thank you very much for your very good introduction and overview in the topic. And now comments and questions. No comments, no question, because we have only possibility now via Zoom to ask Franziska, because she cannot share with us the next break.
Hello. I always wonder when we hear about this kind of idea that we hear very often since the full-scale invasion of Russia and Ukraine regarding the German historical perspective and narrative, that you can still hear things like, oh, we were so surprised, we didn't know, we were naive. From a perspective of a Polish person, for instance, who has studied in Germany, has worked here, has lived in Berlin, who knows the amount of foundations, institutions, libraries, really high-level academic institutions, the volume of intellectual exchange, the newspapers, the publishers, the whole intelligentsia in the elites, the history of those in a country like Germany, it's very difficult to trust it.
Yes. I mean, I agree. I mean, this. I mean, I didn't talk about it in my presentation, but it will be it will not be easy to decolonize the fields in Western academia in Germany, and maybe not in particular, but it's just the field I know best. I could imagine it's not that much different in America, because what is it about? It's also, of course, about resources, jobs, funding, and people are not known to give up positions, established positions of power and hierarchy, just because it's the right thing to do. And because we do have this history of Russo-centrism, and many people have, or institutions which were built have been so kind of linked to this fixation on Russia. I agree. It will be very difficult, and it's not at all clear whether and to what extent it will actually take place. I think it's for one thing about institutional and also to some extent power. So it's to do with prestige, intellectual prestige also, and what I've also, this is just my personal impression from debates and talks I had with colleagues whom I like very much and who've done good work. But I also have this impression that it's perhaps it's easier for the younger generation, because I do not know, this is a bit personal, but I do think it plays a role. I do not know the Russia of the 1990s, where there was this glimpse of hope that maybe everything would be better. And so for me, kind of decentering Russia was easy, but many of the older generation really invested much of their career, of their lives, also their friendships in Russia. And to kind of decolonize your own thinking and decolonize your own perhaps blind spots is difficult. It's also painful, I think. And I do have some sympathy, and I really do believe that my generation is at an easier place. For me, it was easier. Yeah, just I did it at that. But I still think that we should try to push for it, and get ready for debates and struggles.
If I may add one more thing, the difficulty, what I think is that we are not in a luxury situation that we had an event and we are now evaluating it. We are in the middle of a war. And this distrust that many Central European countries feel now towards Germany because of ongoing historical narrative that is simply contradictory to what we all know, creates quite a dangerous situation. So the question is there a way to accelerate this process? And what would you say? I mean, how, for instance, the societies of Central and Eastern Europe can, actually put more pressure towards Germany? What means do we have to do so? Thank you.
I think what's very crucial is to build new networks, and I think to some extent this has already happened. And also I think that's the most, to build networks, but also to create lasting institutions, to somehow not let this be a fleeting debate which goes away again, but to really build something that will stand the test of time. And I'm not sure. I mean, as I pointed out in my talk, this is, and you also said it, this is quite a large problem. We have the problem in academia, we have the problem in media, and we also have the problem in politics. So it's a really huge challenge. And there are some, but there are some, I think there are some examples of politicians also starting to understand it. For now, not the first row, but I was at a conference last week, also in Berlin, where the Member of Parliament, Roderich Kiesewetter, who is a stark supporter of Ukraine and Germany, where he actually said, like publicly and loudly, it is high time that Germany came to terms with its own colonial past together with Russia in Eastern Central Europe. And that was like, I mean, I know it's small, but for me that was like, oh, okay, somebody from who is heard in German society is saying it loudly and clearly. I think we just have to keep kind of, I can only really repeat myself, trying to build networks, build new institutions like RUTA, for example, to accelerate the process. But I absolutely agree with you that it can be frustrating and disheartening, and sometimes you get into a conversation or a context where you have this idea, oh, does anything actually really changed? But then again, you can also look at it from a different angle, in the sense that some things have changed. It's not enough. It's too little, too late. But it is an ongoing process, and giving up is not an option. I'm sorry to stop with such a kind of banal thesis.
So thank you very much. I see we have 2 questions.
Thank you. So I was thinking, you mentioned the friendships and the connections that were made between Germans and Russians before, but I'm also thinking, how do you think does the narrative of liberation from the Nazis in Germany, right, the 1945, how does it figure in the process of decolonization, the academia related to the topics that you work on?
Well, on a wider societal scale, I think this the way kind of the German colonial project ended was not through self-liberation, but through occupation, through military defeat and occupation. So I think has also repercussions for German society, that it was not maybe there is, I'm not sure whether there is a historical precedent for this, but it was not an act of self-liberation. And this is also very much, I think, connected to the way German society reacted, well, not all of it, but parts of German society reacted to the war. Because it was already said previously by one of our colleagues that German society has no memory of occupation, because Germany never really experienced genocidal occupation, unlike Ukraine or Poland. But there's also not really a remembrance of a struggle, of like an open struggle against an aggressor who wants to really extinguish you. So there's like very, very different reaction from parts of German society in comparison, for example, to Poland, for the Ukrainian resistance against German society. And for the question of how it impacted the academia, I think for the question of 1945, it's and beyond that, it's in some ways parallel to, in some ways, not always, but in some ways it's parallel to what we also see in somebody like Frank-Walter Steinmeier. So a generation who has very much accepted responsibility for, well, in a way, accepted German responsibility for the Second World War, but fixated his kind of longing for Versöhnung, yeah, well, you know, what is a Verzohnung? I can't remember now. I don't know. For getting over this this war, and for seeking for forgiveness for German crimes. Reconciliation was the word I was looking for. So this longing for reconciliation was very much centered towards Russia, and I think that to some extent also. But again, this is very kind of hypothetical, because I was just saying to a colleague a couple of months or weeks ago, actually, we would need somebody, a very brave person, who would write a critical history of our own field of Eastern European studies in Germany after 1945, or even before, and the question of why we were so focused on Russia. I think that, apart from the kind of obvious reasons I just put out, but I think there's also this what took place also in parts of the political sphere also took place in the academic sphere, plus this kind of cultural prestige Russian culture still enjoys, or enjoyed, and to some extent still enjoys in Germany. And then there's another, I think, very important phenomenon, which we haven't really talked, well, which I didn't bring up, I should have, is the Gorby generation. So the complete infatuation of many people who decided to study Eastern Europe because of Mikhail Gorbachev. And I can, like, personally name a few, I won't, but name a few names of people who say this kind of fascination for Gorbachev, this kind of enthusiasm for the supposedly peaceful breakup of the Soviet Union, for this man, for his role in German unity was all, you know, and I know how this looks from a Polish and Baltic perspective, but this also, I think, influenced parts of a generation of academics, and of course this is also, of course, led to a certain Russocentrism, and also, but they're not as poignant, perhaps, and not as primitive, I should say, as in wider parts of society, where you actually have this motive of we owe our German reunification to Germany, to Gorbachev. I'm sorry, but a certain fascination with Gorbachev was also, I think, for some scholars, a very important motivator to become involved in Eastern European studies and then focus on Russia. And of course, also because of the structural realities they found at German universities, which is not necessarily a language course in Polish or Ukrainian or Czech, but Russian is kind of the language everybody has to study when they, or does study. Factually, when they start studying Eastern Europe. And I think this is also another blind spot, perhaps, when we, and this is directly tied to the project I'm working on at the moment, that in memory culture, in German memory culture, this idea that the Soviet Union collapsed because, and Germany was reunified because of Gorbachev, is still very much ingrained in the cultural memory. And in this interview I cited with Frank-Walter Steinmeier from the end of 2014, he also says German Ostpolitik, so the SPD Ostpolitik, was what brought the first crack into the walls of the Berlin Wall. And of course, from a Polish perspective, it's more like Reagan, Thatcher, this kind of standing up to the Soviet Union, and of course Solidarność and the Pope, who are seen as the central figures of bringing down Soviet communism, socialism in Poland, and not so much SPD Ostpolitik.
Katarina, Vice, thank you, Franziska. Basically, my question was about Gorby, but you already yes, answered. So I will narrow it a little bit and combine with the first part of the conference. So the notion of decolonization of the topography of Berlin. Yes, this is super crucial, and also for our organization to put the attention that Soviet war memorials, separately with the cemetery, we're not talking about cemeteries right now, only war memorials, crucial as the part of this visual language of the city. And of course, the most complicated thing with these memorials is that no one can critically work with them through, especially in Berlin, I don't know, through contemporary art, through some very, very different approaches, just to bring attention that this is not just a spooky history, yes, and it's really important to work with them. And the main topic there is no public debate, even in academia, I think, towards this topic, and especially because it's a super political question regarding 2+4 Vertrag and all secret, absolutely additional documents that no one can see what is there. And this is also the part of the Pact Gorby France Britain. And can you probably, I don't know, shortly give a hope that there is some methods that probably German public intellectuals and historians can somehow push this political agenda? Can we somehow facilitate that, or is it even the question in German and also maybe not German, German presented historians and memory professionals? Thank you.
Yeah, this is a very good question. My impression is that German academics or German historians in particular are not particularly keen on getting too political. I think maybe this has something to do with the self-understanding as a field, the self-understanding as a kind of a very analytically grounded, which of course we are, but it's this kind of image of the academic, the intellectual, who should not get too involved into public debates, who should not show too much. This goes back to the question of emotions. Should not go too much into this, into this political sphere. I mean, and here I really can talk from personal experience, because I, after the full-scale invasion, decided that I see it differently, as do other colleagues as well. I think we have to be political now. I mean, if not, then what is the point of our work? We work about genocide, we talk about war, we talk about responsibility, and it is just not the time for us to be too cautious to get into the political sphere. But it comes with a social cost. So talking about conventions, yeah. So the convention is perhaps not to get too political, at least not to go beyond writing the, maybe a poignant essay for one of the German newspapers, but to really kind of step out and into the political sphere is difficult. And I mean, you can all, it's not. I'm not saying that nobody does it, but it's not an area where was my impression, where many academics feel particularly comfortable. So I think the answer is no. There is not really a concrete debate about this going on in my field, and maybe specialists thinking about it as an actual debate. How can we decolonize Germany's historical landscape, for example, in Berlin? I would say is not really happening. And this maybe also goes back to a different question, because I mean, for a concrete example of Soviet memorials, this is also connected to, I'm not an expert on Eastern Germany, but I'm, of course, very interested in what people like Ilko Sasha Kowalczuk, who's a very eminent expert on Eastern Germany, and others have to say about this phenomena, that in an area which has more experience with Soviet Russian imperialism than West Germany, why is it that in these areas, which are also, like Berlin, marked by these communist memorials, why exactly in this area are there more pro-Russian sentiments than in the rest of Germany? And one explanation I find quite compelling is that Germany has never really come to terms with the fact, or never really discussed the fact, and more or less cites, referring to the works of others here, the theses of others here, that we are also a post-communist country in part. And this kind of reckoning with the communist past, with the Soviet culture, Soviet domination of Central Europe, has not really been addressed in Eastern Germany. To a lesser extent, to a much less address, been faced up than in, for example, Poland or Ukraine, because there was already a Germany which, which kind of integrated the East, which came also to dominate perhaps the post 1990 Germany. It was also not possible for Eastern, or not as easy for Eastern Germany, because actually we did have a liberation movement. We did have this kind of demonstrations against the SED regime, but still, unlike in Poland and in Ukraine, where you can conceptualize this as a kind of the rebirth of a nation which had freed itself from outside control. In Germany, because in Eastern Germany, because there was West Germany, this narrative wasn't really there or embraced, and the comparison was more, or the what is becoming very dominant now in this discourse is more that it was a takeover by the West, by Western Germany, rather than an act of self liberation, and I think that's maybe tied to to also the question of why. The whole issue of Soviet memorials has never been. I mean, I'm not. Of course, there are experts working on it, but not as a societal debate. I don't think it really has taken place. It's of course a very important topic, and I think how to deal with it, we really have to also be in dialogue with Ukraine, with the Ukrainian living here, with Ukrainian Germans. Personally, I would like. As a historian and as a citizen, I would say Ukrainians shouldn't let themselves be deprived of the role of also having participated in the liberation of Europe from fascism. So I think that's just something which is factually not only done by Russians, but by the multi-ethnic Red Army, including Belarusians and including Kazakhs. And I think this participation of Ukrainians should be remembered, because it's also an example of the kind of colonization or Russification of the Soviet Union, that very often people say, oh, the Russians freed us from fascism. And you say, well, no, the Red Army did. But of course, this is very, very ambivalent role of the Soviet Union, which nonetheless, yes, on the one hand, its soldiers participated in freed Auschwitz, but on the other hand, it was also the new Soviet occupation. But I think really it's up to Ukrainians to now deal with these questions, to debate these questions. So I don't feel it's my role right now to comment too much on that.
Thank you very much for the very impressive discussion. And now we continue our discussion and building networks during our coffee break. And we meet us 4:15 here for the next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry I can't be there. Thank you.